Welcome back to another episode of the Elite Agent Masterclass. Today's episode is part 2 with Stephen-James Copp. In episode 1, Stephen, we talked about programming, we talked about the wiring in the brain, we talked about how people could start to explore how to rewire some potentially negative thought processes and negative patterns that they've fallen into. But as I've thought about ending episode 1, what I'd like to explore in part 2 is going a bit deeper, understanding where do these thought patterns originate from and how can people start to make changes today to fix those patterns and start to move on the pathway to happiness and how that can impact their performance. So that's where I'd like to go in part 2, Stephen.
And once again, as always, a really profoundly insightful question, James, and one which is not a simple answer. But I'll try and see if I can articulate it in the easiest way possible. So, my friends call me James. My name's Stephen James. Your name is James. So let's say we've got two Jameses here.
Yep.
James 1 and James 2. So I'm going to tell you a story about James 1 and James 2. So we both grew up, both Jameses. I'm obviously older than you, but we've grown up in similar environments. But you've had very different experiences to me. And I've had very different experiences to you. What experiences are we talking about? What experiences really shape our personality and our thoughts and our values and our beliefs? And it's still very Freudian. It's still very about our formative years. It's still about our parents. We spoke earlier about your children, and I've often spoke about mine, which is, I can give you an example of how parenting can go dramatically wrong when you can be the best, most thoughtful, caring parent possible. And I'd like to think I'm a pretty good dad. But I'll share you a story. I have two lovely daughters, and I adore my children, probably the meaning of my life. I adore my children. And my oldest daughter, when she was very young, I was looking after her one night, and she was staying with me. I'd separated from her mum, and I was at that point studying psychology quite in depth. And we're going back 30 years now. And we were cuddling, watching a movie, and I was cuddling her, and like you do, and she was nestling into me, and I was rubbing her legs, trying to gently soothe her and regulate her sympathetic nervous system and calm her down. And she was 5, she had a little bit of downing on her legs, some very fine hair, which all children have. And I rubbed her legs. I said, you're like a little monkey. I said, you're so cute. It was a term of endearment. I wanted to eat her. I said, lovely. I adored my daughter. For the rest of her life, she's carried an issue that she doesn't like any hair on her legs. And that's a direct consequence of my interaction and what I said, which was simply a term of endearment. Who hasn't said these thoughts to their children? You're so cute, like a little monkey. And I meant like a little spider monkey, a cute little... Of course, she didn't want to be a monkey. And when she was young, she didn't have the intellectual or the data set or the emotional maturity to better process that comment. So there's a simple example of how, as parents, people often wrongly think that a bad story in your head, a bad narrative, bad behaviours often come from trauma. And when I say trauma, trauma with a capital T. Trauma where we've been sexually abused, physically abused, emotionally abused by our parents or those around us. And indeed, please don't let me, I'm not saying that doesn't cause issues. It does, massive issues. However, it's more subtle than that. For most people, they grow up in a perfectly functional family. I did. Very loving family, 2 good parents, very meaning, but none of them had studied psychology. None of them understood the power of the words. And I just want to stop there on the word words. Words are spelt. And why am I stopping on that? Because what do we derive from the word spelt? Spell. Words are spells. What people say have such a big impact on us. And even what they say to each other. When we're growing, we have a wonderful thing called mirror neurons. We do all our lives. And when we're very young, we can be doing a million a minute. Something crazy. We're mirroring the behaviour and the actions and interpreting that of our parents. And their behaviour towards each other. So it's not always behaviour towards us. So you could be the most loving father in the world, but I'm watching you argue with your wife, which we all do.
Yeah.
It could be over the remote control. It could be over something, what's for supper this evening? It could be a loving conversation. It could be horseplay. But I, once again, don't have that emotional intelligence to interpret correctly as to what's happening. So I'm mirroring that. I'm observing what a functional relationship is because you're my mum and dad. So that would dictate what my relationships will be like later on in life.
I just picked up on a word there that you used, and I think it's quite important. What a functional relationship looks like. But obviously, in the example of my scenario with Stanley, nearly 5, and Margot is 3.5.
Yeah.
What they perceive as functional is simply what they learn from Hayley and I and our behaviour towards one another. That doesn't mean it's functional. It's just their interpretation of function. Which, going back to episode 1, probably articulates in a very, very simple way the stories and the data sets that people are picking up through life. That example right there is one of them.
100%.
In our formative years, in our infancy, our role models are our parents.
Yeah.
And potentially then as you get a little bit older, it might well be school teachers or whatever, but primarily in those first 4, 5, 6 years, it's almost exclusively parents with the add-on of extended family, grandparents and whatever. And so those are the most powerful stories.
Hugely, because who are the biggest heroes in your story when you're a child? Your mum and your dad.
Yeah.
When you're a boy, you know, my father he was a hero to me. He's actually a very simple, kind, gentle man, which to me is the best type of man, a gentle man. But he was my hero. So, and my mother, my heroine, you know, these were my role models. Freud said we marry our mothers and as boys, and girls marry their fathers. There's a debate around that, but we certainly marry attributes of the people we idolise when we grow.
It's interesting you say that. Just as a segue, so my sister is 10 years younger than me, and she recently said to my other half, so her other half, Sean, he proposed to her recently. So they're getting married in a couple of years, and I don't know how the conversation came up, but she said to Hayley in conversation, I'm basically marrying my brother. So it's interesting that you said that, because obviously I'm 10 years older, so I probably had some impact on my sister's life.
Massively.
But not realising it.
And it's not always parents. So it's not always parents. The same as it's not always trauma that creates the bad. Trauma can lead to good.
Yeah.
You know, if you look at it, and I've worked a lot with celebrities, with footballers, with athletes, with musicians, a lot of driven. If we take a very famous musician, Robbie Williams, I haven't worked with Robbie, but I'm sure Robbie won't mind because he's a real advocate of mental health. Robbie recently collected an award. And he said, I'd like to thank depression, I'd like to thank anxiety, I'd like dyspraxia, I'd like to thank alcoholism, addiction. He thanked all of his dysfunction because they became drivers. So they can drive or drag you. You know, dysfunction, growing up, can drive you forward and push you and think, no, I'm going to prove that story wrong, or it can drag you. You can live in the shadow of that and think, no, I'm no good. Because of that, that makes me insignificant. And the story can be negative.
So that's a really interesting point you posed there. In the origin story of the origin of the stories that we tell ourselves do generally come from our parents. But where does that, what am I looking for here? Where does that decision making come from? In so much as some people choose to use that, let's use the word trauma, to fuel them. They choose a form of negativity to fuel them, to prove a point, to prove people wrong. But others, it consumes them and it suppresses them, and it's almost like they've got a foot on their head and they're, you know. Where does that programming come from?
Good question.
How does that get determined?
Reinforcement of message, environment, peers, school. So, mum and dad, for your first 3 to 5 years of your life, pretty much they're the ones who are giving you the message, because you don't have much exposure other than, I'm concerned about this, but other than now we've got the internet and iPads and stuff. But if you remove that, before that, there was no real external influence. Mum and dad, family members. Sure. They're the biggest storytellers in your narrative, in the story of yourself you're making of your life. But then you go to school. And then you meet other children, peers, and they're massively influential. And in fact, if you think about it, your friends at school are more important than your parents in your mind, even consciously. You want their approval more than your mum and dad's. In fact, you rebel against your mum and dad. Yeah. Not everybody rebels, just hold that thought. Some people dye their hair pink and play punk music. That's why popular music, it's always going to be different to what the parents like, because it's an act of rebelling. So they're rebelling against their parents.
Right, okay, yeah.
But not all children rebel. Not all children rebel. The ones who rebel usually turn out to be the ones who push back and drive. The ones who don't rebel and comply, depending on the amount of time spent with the parents, depending on the environment they're growing up in. If the environment they're growing up in supports the narrative of the parents, then that's going to be reinforced even more, isn't it? That's going to be reinforced. So if your parents' narrative is one of, you're not good enough, and that's really the foundation of most models I come across. I'm not enough. It's very common. So if anybody watching is thinking about that, we all think it, myself included, we are good enough. But most of us start with that foundation, I'm not good enough. Now, if we go to school and we complete tasks and we pass exams and we achieve, we start to challenge that narrative. And we can, if we're lucky, and we got good school teachers, which is why teaching is so important. If we got good influential school teachers, one who says, I like you, James, and I think you're great, that suddenly challenges the narrative, I'm not good enough.
Yeah.
And you might push a little bit harder for an exam. You then pass an exam. You then draw a good picture. You then play a good guitar chord. Before you know what, the confidence is building and you're breaking the spell.
And somebody has simply said they believe in you.
All you need is one person to believe in you. That's why teachers play such a pivotal role in childhood development, in adult development, in life development. One person to say, James, I think you've got this. I think you're good. It could be a friend's parent. It could be a school teacher. It could be an after-school football coach. One person to believe in you. And arguably, if you find your niche, if you find something you're good at.
Yeah.
You know, we know that self-esteem is based in completion of tasks and being good at something. And usually being good at something means repetition. So that if children can complete, the biggest myth is to help our children. No, we want to let them struggle a bit. When I say struggle, I mean with a small s and kindly and observed. Let them complete tasks, let them work out problems and build that self-confidence. So while parents can sometimes get it so very wrong, it's really quite easy to put things right.
So I want to touch on the point you've made around a lot of the people that you work with. It's that I'm not good enough. Okay, so clearly that seed has been sown at a relatively young age. What are parents doing so wrong? Because ultimately it needs to be, the people listening in are the parents. They are the business leaders. I feel that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but this is so transferable across every facet of life. It isn't exclusive to children. It's just we're using children as the demonstration of the exercise. But if a business leader can demonstrate that belief in a person and give them the confidence that they are good enough and they can win and they can succeed. But what is it that parents and business leaders are doing wrong to create people that believe they're not good enough?
Correct. And I love the fact you're using the word wrong, because they're not doing anything wrong. And let me qualify that and quantify it. So I'll use me as an example rather than use any of my clients. I can bare my soul. So I grew up in an environment where sport was huge. My dad was an extremely good football player. My brother was a really good football player, both who I adore. I wasn't. Now, my brother was more aligned with my father.
Okay.
I like to go fishing, and I like walking in the woods, and I was a deep thinker, even at a young age. So my father would spend more time with my brother. He would go and watch him play football. And he didn't want to come fishing with me because he found that boring. Didn't mean I was neglected. My dad adores me. We look identical. And I adore him. He's a really good man. But subconsciously as a child, the message I'm absorbing is, I'm not as good as my brother. I'm not good enough. And there comes sibling rivalry. Now, fortunately, I have a wonderful relationship with my brother and I adore him and his family. But there, for most of our life, there was a lot of sibling rivalry. Through a simple misunderstanding. Simple misunderstanding. Can you see how easily, not through abuse, not through alignment.
Not through any wrongdoing.
Not through any wrongdoing, but simply you not being aligned or your children feeling not aligned with you or your wife. It can be either or both. Mm-hmm. That can easily lead you to think, I don't fit. And often people say I'm the black sheep. That means they never felt aligned.
Very much me.
And me.
I don't mind bearing my soul.
And me.
I was very much the black sheep growing up.
And
but
me.
I've felt that way, and we've talked about this, I think, previously. I've felt that way for a long time throughout my life.
Right.
From the perspective of, I feel I do have different perspectives on things. I do have quite strong opinions on certain things that people potentially disagree with or whatever else. And I've always thought to myself, up until, I don't really know, probably up until I had children, why is it that I am always the outlier? And then I just accepted I am the outlier because I don't think like most people, but that's okay.
But also, you're also focused. It's called red car syndrome. When you buy a red car, if you're lucky enough to have a red Ferrari, which I'm not, we're not, but if you have a red Ferrari, you don't see any. As soon as you buy one, you see red Ferraris everywhere.
Of course.
Because you become conscious of it. You're conscious at some point when you were younger of not fitting in some way, shape or form. Yeah. Not being aligned with what your dad liked or your mum or somebody who's influential. But that sets a precedent then. So you're observing, looking become hypervigilant for where you don't belong.
Which comes back to the original point in the first episode
100%.
of that's the story, that's the narrative.
The story. I don't
the
fit.
data that I've gathered is that I don't fit. So
You
I'm
don't
then
fit.
also looking for evidence that reaffirms that I don't fit.
So if I was working with you, James...
But my behaviour then would probably
100%.
influence my not fitting.
I could say to you, tell me a time where you really excelled. So I can think of a time where at university I scored a try. And I was lucky enough to get in the team one day, and I was at Durham. I scored a try, and for a moment, for 3 minutes, I felt king of the world, and my name was being screamed, and I felt like I was playing for England. I can recall that. What we don't realise, we can anchor to these experiences, and I can use that.
Yeah.
I can use that to say, no, I did fit. On that day, for 3 minutes, I have evidence. I fitted. Not only did I fit, I was a hero. Now, of course, that's not the story of my life. But I'm choosing to ignore those. Now, I was choosing to ignore those. With a client, I'd say, whoa, let's take that. Let's take that point of reference and let's use that. Let's build a new data set of these positive experiences, which we all have.
Yeah.
You look back over your life, James, there are moments where you would have thought, I really nailed that.
Yeah.
Whatever it is, watching your child born, getting married, being a best man, whatever it is, there are moments where we nail it, but we forget them. The brain is being hypervigilant on moments where we fail, or we perceive to be black sheep, or whatever fits the negative narrative.
Whatever supports the strongest story.
Correct.
So the strongest story isn't succeeding, the strongest story is not fitting in. So
Correct.
Yeah, which makes a lot of sense. It reminded me actually, and I don't know whether you're familiar with this. I know a chap, and he does a daily routine. He has worked with a coach similar to yourself, Stephen, and he does a daily thing that he calls his Kickstarter.
Yeah.
And he shared it with a group of us recently. And that Kickstarter consists of 4 steps.
Yeah.
He asks himself a question about what he wants from his day. So his day starts with this Kickstarter every day. What does he want from that day? So the question is, what do I want to achieve from today? Or, if he's spending time with his family, how can I show up as the best dad possible today? Or whatever the case may be. But it's a very simple question. Then he'll make a statement that answers that. So it would be a case of, okay, so how do I show up as the best dad today? Today I'm going to be super present with my children and my wife. Okay, cool. Then it's a memory. So a memory that he recollects where he showed up in answer to that question.
Yeah.
And then finally it's the vision. How does he want to end his day?
Yeah.
So when he's reflecting back, how did he show up? And that stuck with me because I think it then reaffirms what you've just shared. That Kickstarter, that question, that statement, that vision, and that memory, then that vision, it almost, as a daily exercise, reaffirms getting past possible negative
100%. It
stories.
primes his day.
Yeah.
And which is why, in the army, but also I often say to my clients, start the day off by making your bed perfect.
Yeah.
You make a perfect bed in the morning before you leave it. It starts the day with you accomplishing a task well, a task that you can't fail. Making a bed.
Yeah.
So, and that could be just throwing the quilt over, but pulling it so it's nice and neat, puffing the cushions up and making that bed. You are starting the day as a winner.
Yes.
You are starting the day in a positive mindset. And then let's move forward. Little micro habits, little marginal gains throughout the day, little wins. People focus on the big wins. That's not the way you win. Yeah. To become a 25-mile marathon, Olympic marathon winner, you don't focus on the 25 miles. You focus on each step, one at a time. So what I suggest to my clients when working with them, let's break your life down into marginal gains. And let's make perfection, which doesn't exist, but let's make really good behavior and performance in little places. When you brush your teeth, let's get it right. Let's do it properly.
Yeah.
Let's say, well, each day I'm going to do 20 brushes, or I'm going to do it for a minute. And I'm going to make my bed perfectly. The day is then set. Have a workout. Go for a walk. Go for a run. I'm not saying that works for everybody. What I'm saying is, for most, that is really effective.
Yeah. So those marginal gains,
marginal gains,
which I suppose in some respects leads into the answer to one of the questions I posed at the beginning of this recording, in so much as what can people start to do today that will start to reshape those stories and change that narrative?
Yeah. So first things first is to recognize that there are certain parts of your story and narrative which aren't serving you well. Do an audit of your brain. Work with a coach, work with a psychologist, work with a friend. Doesn't have to be one of us, but work with a friend and sit down and map your brain. Write down everything about your thoughts, every thought you have. Write them down. I like quiche. I don't like vegetables. I don't particularly like open spaces. I want to be successful, don't feel good enough. Go down through and write down everything you can. Make a journal for a month or a few weeks. Start journaling. Start getting it out from here and getting it down on there. Make it real, make it tangible. Then let's start to analyse. Does that serve me well? No. Let's reframe that. I don't like vegetables. Let's write the opposite to that. What would happen if I did like vegetables? Would that make a big change to my life? Negligible. Well, is it worth me giving it energy? Not really. Well, let's dismiss that thought. But you don't have to do anything magic in here. You have to be aware.
Yeah.
So in order for us to be aware and start to be logical and pragmatic and methodical, which is, for me, the key magic to all of this, is being methodical and pragmatic and have a process, is to start mapping your brain. Writing down, get a journal, writing down your thoughts, understanding how you think, and being brutally honest with yourself. Even if it's really bad thoughts, even if it's really scary thoughts, write them down and then recognize, okay, does that serve me well? No. What's a better way of thinking about that? And then write its counter thought. It's not hard. It's really good. Write the counter thought.
It's an interesting yet very simple and very talked about subject, isn't it?
Massively.
I think recently, more so, a lot of people were talking about journaling and various forms of journaling. But to simply write down your thoughts is essentially to get it out, isn't it? And
100%.
Would you say that to physically write it rather than put it into a digital device has more
physically.
impact? Yeah,
because you're using kinesthetic, using touch, using sight, and say it as you write it. That's called sensory overloading.
Yeah.
And I'd go one step further. What I do to reinforce the good stuff I want to keep is I use a colour, different colour pen, and I use smell. So I might choose lavender, lang lang, lemon, lime, because that's recall. And if I want to recall that thought and I want anchor points, and we'll move on to anchor points when we look at solutions.
Yeah.
But I want to create anchor points to the good thoughts, to the elements of me I want to retain, to the elements of me that I want to not only retain, I want to magnify. Let's make the best of Stephen bigger and better, and the worst of me smaller and negated. And that's a very straightforward, pragmatic exercise that most people neglect and should be taught at schools. And I'm massively in support of young children understanding emotional regulation, and that's what you're doing. You're regulating your emotions. You've got to be accountable for your own thoughts and feelings, because here's the truth. And it's a truth that most people, maybe it's the place where we end, but it's a truth that most people don't want to face. Nobody's coming to save you. Nobody can save you from yourself. Only you. So take action now. Get on it. Refine your brain. Get a good life. Write the life you want and negate the life you don't want.
Wow. What a place to end that episode. Again, so much insight, so much value. There's so many strong takeaways for me to reflect on. And I think in part 3 to this, there has to be a part 3 to this. And in part 3 to this, Stephen, I'd really like to explore going that level deeper again, but start to look at more of the solutions and the outcomes that people could expect by making some of these, in your way of explaining things very positively, simple things, but getting them right and getting these solutions on point. So that was a fascinating episode, so much value there, and we look forward to sharing more in episode 3.